Welcome to On Target HTML5. This is Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we're actually going to be working with the date function in PHP. This is part one of a two-part series, and what I want to do is I want to cover some of the questions I get asked most often about how I manipulate dates inside my web applications. So over the next couple of tutorials we'll work with the date function in PHP. I get asked quite frequently how to manipulate dates and how to work with the dates that are coming back from databases or that we're actually getting back from our server inside PHP. From simple formatting of the dates that are displayed to more complex calculations like the difference between two times, checking the value of a date, calculating age, and stuff like that. So that's the kind of stuff I get asked all the time. I figured I'd put together a couple of tutorials that cover how I actually go about doing all that stuff. So I thought it was about time that I put together a group of tutorials and show you how I manipulate dates inside my web applications. I'll cover the 10 most popular questions that I receive, and if you think of any additional formulas that I missed, send me a quick note and I can add them to the tutorial set. So in this tutorial, part one, we're going to cover getting the current time and formatting it, formatting a date, convert minutes to hours and minutes, get the difference between two times, and then check if a date is in the past or in the future. Hope you enjoy the series. Let me know if I need to add any additional information to the content. And with that, let's move into our development environment and start entering some code and playing with dates inside PHP. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our development environment and drop out of our presentation and into our development environment. I want to confirm that we've got the Apache server up and running because we will be translating PHP code. We've got to have that server running to do that. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Sublime Text 3, which will be the text editor I'll be using for the demonstration. And Google Chrome will be the browser that I'll be demonstrating our code in. And I've already got that loaded up in my local host, and I actually have my template.php file loaded. This is the file I use for most of our demonstrations as we're working with code, if you haven't been on or viewed any of my tutorials before. So if you want to pause to go ahead and get this tutorial typed in, or this template typed into your working directory, that would be great, because we're going to jump right into our lessons. So the first thing I want to do, I never overwrite my template file. I want to do a save as. And I'm going to save this as returndate.php. So we'll actually have a file to work with. I'm going to use camel case when I name that. Anyone that's done groups of my tutorials know that's usually how I name my stuff. I'm going to go back into my browser and go ahead and load up that returndate.php file. So we've got the working file inside of our browser. What I want to do in this tutorial, or this portion of the tutorial, is to return the current date. And we use a basic function in PSP to do that. We don't need any parameters. We'll format the date based on the formatting recommendations in the PHP manual, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But the first thing I want to do is let's come right below that H1 header, and let's go ahead and add an H2 because I want to break this into sections. We'll be adding a lot of stuff to this. And this is going to be return the current date. And let's go ahead and close out that H2 and then come down a couple lines, and let's go ahead and open up our PHP tags. And I'm going to come down a couple lines and then close that PHP tag so we can put our code in between there, or inside our PHP tags. First thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and create a function, and this function is going to be called new date. So I'm just going to type function. I'm going to name it new date, again using camel case, open and close my parentheses, and then open and close my curly braces. And I got a very little code inside here. I'm just going to go ahead and put in right inside my function. I want to do a return, and it's going to be return date, and I've got it set up as formatting for the month, the day, and the year. The capital M is a short textual representation of the month, so it's going to give me my 3-letter month. The small d is a 2-digit representation of the day with a leading 0, and then the capital Y is a full numeric representation of the year, which is my 4-digit year. So that's how I've set up this formatting. Let me show you where I get that information on how I format my dates. If you go to the PHP manual, you can actually see under php.net, they have all the different formatting that we can do here. Let's stretch this out a little bit. All the different formatting we can do with this date function inside the php.net manual. So it's php.net/manual/function.date.php. And you'll see me refer to the manual a lot as we go through this training, because this is where I'm getting a lot of my formatting for the demonstrations I'm going to be doing. And as we go through here, I'll walk through this more and more. I'll bring it into play more and more. So what we've done is we've created this function called new date. No parameters are passed in. We're just returning a date with the month, the day, and the year. Now, obviously, to get that displayed, I'm going to have to come down outside my function. I'm going to create a new variable called display date. And again, using camel case. And that's going to be equal to calling that function new date, open and close my parentheses, and that with a semicolon. And then I just want to come down below that and echo display date. I'm going to echo that variable that we just created that now holds that returned value. Because remember, we're returning this, and since we're returning it, we're actually now returning it inside this variable. So I'm going to say display date, and that with a semicolon. Let's go ahead and save all of our changes. If I refresh my browser window, you'll notice now I've got the return the current date. That's my H2 heading that I gave it. And that's returning the current date that I'm currently recording this, May 21st, 2016. And it's based on the formatting that I set in here. If I don't like the hyphens, I can actually take the hyphens out, put in a /, because it's based on the formatting that I've actually put inside those parentheses. Save that change, refresh my browser window. So I could format this any way that I needed it to display inside my browser just based on returning it. And again, using those parameters from the PHP.NET manual to set up the way I want it to display. For instance, let's just suppose I didn't want this 3-digit or 3-letter display for my capital M. I'd rather have the 2-digit display for the month. So again, I could go back to this manual. And if I look here, I've got this lowercase m as a numeric representation of a month with leading zeros. So if I were to go back into my text editor, and instead of having that capital M, put in a small n, save that change. And if you remember, we've got the alphanumeric or the alpha representation now. When I refresh, now I've got the 2-digit representation based on the formatting that I changed inside that return date or that date function. So I hope that explains how I get the dates from my system when I'm working with dates and how I actually set up the formatting. The next thing we're going to look at, we're going to explain how to set up and format a date a little more complex than what we just did. All right, so in this demonstration, we're going to take a date from a string value and format the date in the way that we want it to appear inside our application. This is used quite often when you're reading strings from a database and want to display the date string in the form on a web page. We do that a lot, especially when we're working with data. So the first thing I want to do, so we have copies of all these different techniques we're using, I'm going to do a save as. I want to save this as format date. So I'm just going to go ahead and take out that return, type format date. Go ahead and save that change. Let's go back into our browser now and load that up onto our screen, into our browser window. And now what I want to do is I'm going to, inside my HTML document, I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of line breaks and a new H2 so we know we're working in a different section of our code. So I got a couple of line breaks to give us some space. Got an H2 that says format date. I'm going to go ahead and open my PHP tags, come down a couple lines and close those tags. And then inside my PHP, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and create a variable. I'm going to call the variable starting date. And that is going to be equal to a string. So inside of quotation marks, I'm going to put 2016-05-24. And that's just a string date. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and format that date in a much better way that we could actually use inside of our application. So I'm going to create another variable right below that, and I'm going to say new date. And that new date is going to be equal to date. This is a built-in function in PHP. I'm going to put J/M/Y. That's the formatting that I'm passing in. And where am I going to get the information I need for that? And it's going to say string str 2x. So in other words, another built-in function inside PHP. And then I'm going to put in that starting date variable. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the value that I've just put inside this variable. I'm running it in through a string to date function inside PHP, and then I'm formatting it with those values based on the formatting strings of our PHP manual. Now I'm going to do something, just going to come below that, and I'm going to say echo new date. So I'm going to bring that date to our screen so I can see how we've actually set it up. And again, I'm just taking a variable string that I've put inside of a variable called starting date. I'm grabbing this string data, I'm taking that string data, and I'm converting it string to time. That's a built-in function inside PHP, a built-in method. It's taking the value of this and converting that string to time, and then I'm formatting the time using the built-in date function inside PHP. Let's go ahead and save all the changes, refresh our browser window, and you'll see now we've taken that string and we formatted it with a small j, small m, which is giving us our 2-digit month, small y gives it the 2-digit year, and if you look at the j, what the j does, let's go back into our manual. What is that small j? How does that set up that date? And if you look right here, it says day of the month without leading zeros. So that's what we're actually doing with this particular j. We're giving the date of the month without leading zeros. And if you look over here, you'll see day of the month is 24. If I were to make that day of the month 1, so we can check to make sure we don't have the leading zero, save the change, refresh the browser window. Now you see it's 1/05/16. So again, just a way that I format dates when I get dates is a string value into my applications. This is how I can actually set them up and format them to be displayed better inside of a form. So in the next example, we're going to look at getting the week number from a date. And that comes in very handy when you're working with registration processes and you're looking at just, oh, I want to pull out the week of this particular date. So that's what we're going to demonstrate next. All right, so in this demonstration, we'll get the week number from a date string. Based on the power that's built into PHP, there's a very simple process to do this. All we need to use is the date function and a parameter that will give us our response. So what I want to do, let's go ahead and save that file. I'm going to do save as. Let's save this as week number date. So I'm going to come in here and say week number date. Let's go ahead and save that. I'm going to go into my browser and load up that file. And it leaves us where we left off in the last time. Okay, so when you're coding, there are often times that we're going to need the week number of a particular date. We'll pass in a date parameter and have it return the week number of the given parameter. And this is the week number of the year. So in other words, the year that we're in, it's going to return that week number that we're currently in. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing we did in the last exercise. I'm going to go ahead and put in a couple of break statements. Give ourselves a nice H2 heading so that we know what we're actually looking for in this demonstration. Let me go ahead and scroll up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and put in my PHP tags. Opening PHP, my closing PHP. If I can learn to type, let's go ahead and get rid of some of these spaces. And then what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and create a variable, and I'm going to call the variable current week number. So I'm going to come in here, say current week number. And that is going to be equal to a date. So I'm going to go after that date function again. And inside my parentheses, I'm going to have a capital W. And that's actually going to return that week. And that with a semicolon. Then come down right below it. And I'm just going to put in an echo statement. Week number is, and that with a colon and a space. And then right there, I'm going to go ahead and concatenate the value of that current week number variable. And end that with a semicolon. And that's basically all we need to do to return the current week number that we're in. I'm going to go ahead and take out a couple of these blank lines. Let's go ahead and save those changes. Great time to pause if you want to go ahead and type that in. And now when I go and refresh my browser, it's going to tell us that we're currently in week number 20. And again, it's taking that value, it's getting the week or the date actually from the PC, wherever we've got that server installed at. And that's where it's actually getting that 20 from. So it's returning the week number. If I wanted to return the month, I could actually just change that W, put in a capital M, save that change and refresh the browser window. That would actually return the month that we're currently in. And if I wanted to return the go ahead and return or refresh that, and again that capital F is returning the value of the month. And I'm getting this, again, right from this manual where we looked at all these different parameters, a full to contextual representation of the month, such as January through March. That's what F is giving. M, it does the exact same thing with May because May only has 3 characters. So it's actually going to return the exact same value with the value M. So in the next demonstration, we're going to convert minutes. So we're going to put in a value of minutes, and it's going to return back hours and minutes to us. I'm going to show you what we do to actually do that when we're actually trying to calculate the number of hours and minutes since a given date and time. All right, so in this demonstration, we're going to convert minutes to hours and minutes. We'll input a value in minutes as an integer into our function, then convert the integer to hours and minutes for our application. This is very useful when calculating times inside of our web applications. Most everything in our database is stored in seconds inside that database, and there are many times that we'll need to make conversions for a more uniform display inside of our application or inside of our forms. So the first thing I want to do, let's go ahead and do a save as. I'm going to save this as hour minutes-php. I'm going to go into the browser and load up that portion of the application. Then I'm going to come right down below where we actually did our last demonstration. Again, just as we've done in the past, I'm going to put in my break tags with an H2, just so you can understand what we did for this demonstration. We're actually going to be converting we're going to be converting minutes to hours and minutes. And this one's going to be a little more complex than the one we just completed. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my PHP tags, come down a few lines and close those PHP tags. And inside the PHP, the first thing I want to do is I want to create a function. And that function is going to be called convert to hours and minutes. So it's a rather long name, but it describes exactly what we're doing. Open up my curly brace, and I'm going to come down a couple lines and close that curly brace. And you'll notice I've already set in a format option inside there that's actually going to bring my hours and minutes with 2 value displays. And we'll talk more about that format in a minute. First thing I want to do inside my function is I want to go ahead and put in a conditional statement. I'm going to say if my time variable, which we haven't created yet, but we will, is less than 1, then I want to actually just go ahead and return outside of this function. So in other words, if there's nothing there, or if it's less than 1, there's nothing to actually convert. So let's just go ahead and drop out of the function. Then I'm going to come down and, again, inside my function, I'm going to create a couple of variables. First is going to be an hours variable. And then hours is going to be equal to floor. And if you're not aware what floor is, it's a mathematical function inside PHP. And I actually have a tutorial on it that's on the website. I'm going to take the time, and I want to divide that by 60. And it's going to give me the lowest whole value of that time. That's what floor does. It takes me to the lowest whole value. I'm going to do the same thing with minutes. That is going to be equal to floor. And inside my parentheses, what I want to do there is I'm going to take time, and I want to get the modulus. And the modulus is the remainder. So I'm taking the remainder of that first value that we did with the division by 60, and I'm going to take the modulus of 60. And that with a semicolon. And then what I want to do is I want to do a return. And that return is going to be as sprintf, which is another built-in function inside of PHP. And I want to take my format, which we just set up in the upper example inside of our function. So I'm taking that format that we set up, and I'm going to format the hours and the minutes. And I'm going to end that with a semicolon. Now I want to come outside my function, and I want to set up some variables. First variable I'm going to do is time. This is going to be the time variable. This is the value that we're actually going to do our conversion on. And we'll start with a value like 526. So we're going to say that we have 526 minutes. And I want to do a convert. So I'm going to create a convert variable. And I want that to be equal to, and now I'm actually going to call that function. So I want to do convert to hours and minutes. And inside my parameter that I'm passing in, I'm going to pass in that time variable. So I'm passing in the value of the time variable inside my function to actually do this conversion. And then what I want to do is I want to echo that convert variable onto the screen so we can actually see what the return was from our function. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. Let me scroll up a little bit. Great time to pause if you want to type that in. I'm going to go inside my document, refresh my window, and I've got an undefined variable. Convert. I forgot the N. That's why we got the error. Let's go ahead and save the change. Refresh the browser window, and you'll see that we've got 8 hours and 46 minutes based on that value of 526. If I were to change this, let's change it to a known value, because we know how many hours should be in 120 minutes. That should be exactly 2. Save that change. And again, I'm just doing this to make sure that we've got our function working correctly, and it gives me exactly 2 hours. The reason we're seeing the 2 values is because the way that we set up this integer right here, to set up the way that we're actually formatting that text. And you can actually see that the date interval, it tells you when we pass in literals, how we're passing this in, and these are the values that we can actually put in there to set up that format. And again, that's at that php.net/manual/en data interval format. That's what we're actually doing right here when we set up this format interval. So we're setting up our integers, and these are literal integers. That's what that percentage sign means. We're setting up a literal integer, and that's how we're setting it up to be displayed. And again, it's going to convert whatever we put inside this time variable based on how we wrote the application. So I'm going to save that 180, and again, we know that that should be exactly 3 hours. And if I were to put 185, we know when it does a conversion, it should be 3 hours and 5 minutes. And because of the way that we formatted it, it should come up as 03:05. And you'll see we've got it set up as 03:05. So that's how we actually take values from our database and convert them into an hour and minute display inside of our application. So in the next demonstration, we're going to get the difference between 2 times. And again, this one's a little more complex than the ones we've been looking at, but it's one that I use quite often, where I actually get the difference between 2 inputted times. All right, so in this demonstration, we're actually going to go about this a couple of different ways, because I want you to see some different ways that I do things, not only just in structural coding, which is what we've been using up to this point, but there's some ways to actually do this in object-oriented programming also. And sometimes it's a little cleaner that way. So in the demonstration, we're going to demonstrate how we can calculate the difference between 2 times. We're going to input 2 dates and have the function calculate the difference from those dates. Again, the function is very useful when we're trying to determine how long the dates are between themselves. This is good for checking out the length of time between registrations, current date for posts. I mean, I do this with a whole bunch of things. But what I want to do is I'm going to save this in a completely different file, because I'm going to do a couple different demonstrations here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my template.php file. Let's go ahead and close out that last one. I want to do a save as, because we're going to do this with a fresh file. I want to call datediff, D-A-T-E, capital D-I-F-F. Save that file. Let's go back and reload that file inside of our browser. We've got a brand new clean working file. So the first thing I want to do is, in most cases when you do this, you're going to want the number of days or minutes that have passed between certain dates. So to calculate the number of days that have passed, we'd enter the following code. I'm going to go ahead and put an H2 just like I've been doing before. And actually I'm going to demonstrate this in a bunch of different ways. So you're going to get to see how I do this, not only for days and dates, but you're also going to see how we do it for hours and minutes and all kinds of things. So let's go ahead and open up our PHP tags. Come down a few lines and close our tag. Inside my PHP, the first thing I want to do is I want to create a couple of variables. So I'm going to create my first variable is going to be called then, and that's going to be equal to a date string. So inside quotation marks, I'm going to have 2010-01-01. So I'm looking at January 1st, 2010. And then I'm going to create another variable. Taking that same then variable, I'm going to actually do something with that string. So I'm going to say str. This is string to time, is a built-in function inside PHP, and I'm going to do that with that then variable. So the variable that we just created, I'm actually going to convert that from a string into a true time variable. Then what I want to do is I'm going to come right down below that and create another variable called now. And again, the reason I've done the conversion is we can't actually work with this straight text. That's string text. It's not going to allow us to do calculations on that, because if we actually try to push that into the date function, it's not going to recognize what it is. So I'm going to create another variable called now, and that's going to be equal to time, which is exactly right now. So I'm actually going into PHP and saying, give me the time at this moment that I run this particular application, and that's what it's going to use to calculate. And then what I want is I create another variable called difference. And this is going to be equal to now. So I'm taking the value of the now variable, and I want to subtract the then variable. And you would think, just based on that, that we'd be done. We don't have to worry about anything else. We're finished, but that's not true. We're not finished yet because of the way that PHP and actually most programming languages store these times. We actually have to do some conversion to convert this to days. So let's put in a little note in here, and this is how we're converting to days. I want you to see how I actually do this. So I'm going to come right down below that. I'm going to say days. So I'm creating a new variable called days, and that's going to be equal to floor. And again, I'm using that built-in function inside PHP to take this to the lowest whole integer. So I'm going to take the difference, the value of the difference variable, and I want to divide that by 60 times 60 times 24. So what I'm doing is I'm taking all those seconds that are actually stored inside that variable, and we're going to calculate those. We're going to take that into days. We're going to take those seconds and put them into days. So I want to do an echo, and inside quotation marks, days between dates. Let's put a space, a colon. I'm going to put another space, and I'm going to concatenate, and I'm going to put the value of that days variable that we just created. And I'm going to end that with a semicolon. So real quick, let me go ahead and save all these changes. This is a great time to pause if you want to type this in. Let me talk you through this one more time. I'm creating a then variable that stores a string of the date that I want to calculate from. Then I'm taking that same variable and I'm taking that string and I'm converting it to time. So I'm taking the string value and converting it to time and just replacing the value of that same variable. Then I'm creating another variable called now, and that's going to be equal to whatever time it is that this application actually executes. It's going to take the time right from the server clock. Then I'm creating a new variable called difference, and I'm taking the now, the time is right now, and subtracting it from that time value that we created in the then variable. Then I'm taking that, I'm creating a brand new variable, and inside the floor function, I'm looking at the difference, and I'm dividing it by 60 times 24 to actually get the number of days. And then I'm just echoing that value to our screen. So let's go ahead and save all those changes, refresh our browser window, and you'll see that I have got an error between my dates. Undefined variable days. Up. That's because I didn't create the variable correctly. It's 2 typos in the last 2 demonstrations. That's not very good. All right, so correct that, put in a save, refresh our browser window. We have 2,332 days between January 1st, 2010 and the actual current date, which today is actually May 21st, 2016. So that's how many days it is. If I wanted to fix this, or let's say I want to change it, I want to go from January 1st, 2016 till now. So save or change the date, save the changes, refresh our browser window, and we're in day 141 of this particular year because I'm looking at the days now between January 1st, 2016 and the current date. All right, so as you can see by this particular calculation, I was easily able to convert seconds into days using some basic math. There's 60 seconds in a minute, there's 60 minutes in an hour, and there's 24 hours in a day. And that's what I've done right here. I've taken those seconds and converted them into days using basic math. If you multiply the figures above, it will give you 86,400 seconds, which is the total number of seconds that are in a given day. That's how many seconds we have in a day, and that's what I've done. I've divided the difference by the number of seconds in a day. So I divided that difference by the number of seconds in a day. By using the floor function that's built into PHP, I rounded it down to the nearest whole integer. All right, so once you've grasped the fundamentals of dealing with dates and timestamps in PHP, it really pays to look into the date-time class, which is part of object-oriented programming in PHP, simply because it's much cleaner and it provides you with an object-oriented interface inside your programming. So let's look at a different way of doing something very similar, but using OOP. All right, so I'm going to stay inside the same file. I'm going to give ourselves a couple of line breaks like we've been doing in the past. I'm going to give ourselves a new heading. This is going to calculate the time difference between dates using object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming is becoming extremely popular. So I want you to see the difference in how we do this. I'm going to open up my PHP tags. And it is a lot cleaner way of doing coding. I've been doing a lot more stuff in OOP over the last probably year and a half, 2 years, because it is, once you figure it out, once you learn it, it's a lot easier to do things. Say date 1 is going to be equal to a new, and this is where we get into OOP. This is going to be a date time object. And then inside there, I'm going to put in 2016-01-01. This is the same date that we looked at in the previous example. Then I'm going to create another variable called date 2. This is going to be equal to a new date time. So in other words, I'm creating 2 date time objects. And that's what they're called in object-oriented programming. This date time is an actual object in the programming. Now what I want to do is I want the difference. So I'm going to create a variable called difference. And I'll have this one as difference1 because we actually have a difference in the previous example and I don't want the variables to get confused amongst themselves. And I'm going to say date 2 object of the diff. Inside my parentheses, I'm going to say date 1. And again, I'll explain this as soon as we complete it. Come outside my parentheses, format, and then inside my parentheses, I'm going to use that literal figure again. Oops, I need to put this inside quotation marks. My literal, and I'm going to use A. And again, I'm going to show you where we got that formatting from. And then what I want to do is I just want to do an echo statement. And I want to echo days between dates. And that with a colon. And then I want to concatenate the value of that variable difference1. This is basically doing the exact same thing we had done on the top, except now we're actually using the datetime object inside PHP. So let's go ahead and save that change. Refresh our browser window, and you'll see now we get the exact same answer, but this code is much cleaner. I mean, in my opinion, it's much easier to read. We're actually looking at a datetime object, we're creating a couple of variables, we're getting the difference, and we're displaying the difference on the screen. And again, this is the literal. If you go back up here and look inside of our, remember we talked about those literals, that little a, total number of days as a result of a daytime difference. That's where I'm getting that a from. So that's why you see that % a. We're actually using the literal value. Now what I want to do, let's go ahead and save all these changes. All right, so now that you've seen how we can do this, I'm going to go back to our browser window, by the way. Now that you've seen how we can do this with OOP, let's take this one step further because I want you to try to get a handle on some of the different things that we can do once we create this object, because it does open up a lot of possibilities with very little additional code. I'm going to go ahead and put in another title. So I'm going to come right down below our closing PHP tag. We're going to take this one step further using OOP. I'm going to go ahead and open up my PHP tag, come down a few lines and close my PHP tag. And so you don't have to watch me type all this in because you watched me the first time. I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in and then we'll talk it through. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a couple of variables inside my PHP tags. I'm going to create a then variable. And again, this is going to be a string value. And I'm going to take the same thing with that string value and I'm going to make it a new datetime object. So basically what we had done in that first example with the string to time, now I'm doing something very, very similar, but I'm taking it and putting it into a new object. And I'm also creating another object called now, which is the current date time. Then what I want to do is I actually want to get the difference. So again, we're going to do something very similar to what we had done in the first example, but I'm going to create a new variable called difference2. That's going to be equal to then and the difference between then and now. And again, this is the beauty of using OOP, because now I'm referring to this variable then, which is that new datetime object. I'm referring to the object, and I'm referring to the object now, and I want the difference. And again, remember, difference is a built-in method in PHP. So I want that diff between those two. Then what I want to do is I'm going to show you how we can show this in a variety of different formats by using the object. So I'm going to come right down below the diff where I set up my difference variable. I'm going to paste in a comment, and I want to show this in a variety of different ways. So I'm going to copy these so you don't have to watch me type them. But I'm going to come down right below there. I'm going to say I want to echo the difference in years, months, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. So again, using OOP, because I've used that object, I have access to all of those without writing any additional code, just by using the methods of that particular class, because they're there, they're built into my class. So if I save all those changes, great time to pause if you want to type that in. Let's go and refresh our browser window, and you'll notice now from that date of January 1st, 2010 to the day today, to currently, whatever it is right now on my server clock, I've had 6 years pass. And remember, these are all floors. They're all being rounded to the nearest lowest integer. So I have 6 years, 4 months, 20 days, 2 hours, 4 minutes, 54 seconds have passed since this particular time. And if you want me to watch these change, I'm just going to change that to the second month. Let's save that change. And again, you'll watch everything update, 3 months, 20 hours. And if I were to upgrade it right now, because the seconds have changed, you'll actually probably see the seconds and the minutes update just by refreshing the browser. And again, it's because we're actually grabbing that now date time object inside of our server. So there are a lot of different things that we can do working with the datetime object or the datetime class inside of PHP. This is just some of the examples. In part 2 of this series, we're actually going to go through 5 more ways that I actually use and format dates inside of PHP. We're going to look at checking a date is in the past or the future, checking or calculating an age based on a date, show a list of days between 2 dates. We're going to do time ago dates, and that's great for tracking features that track how long like a post has been messaged or a message has been posted on a blog, how long since that last Twitter update, whatever. It's called the time ago calculation. And then I'm going to wrap up part 2 with a countdown, how I actually trigger countdowns using PHP inside of some of the applications I've written for my customers. So I hope you enjoyed this. This was the first 5 steps. We got 5 more to go. I look forward to seeing you in part 2. If you have any questions or comments, just feel free to drop me a line or leave them in the comments below, and I look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to save all those changes, and we'll be back in a minute with part 2 of working with time functions inside PHP.